I knew something was wrong the moment my sister looked at me with pity. Not concern, not love, pity. And if you've ever been looked at that way by someone who knows you better than almost anyone else, you know exactly how unsettling that feels. We were standing in her kitchen. I was making coffee. Completely normal morning. Then she gently touched my arm and said, "Have you been taking care of yourself lately?" The question hit me like a slap. I laughed. What kind of question is that? But she didn't laugh back. Instead, she gave me that careful look people use when they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. That's when my stomach dropped, because suddenly I realized this wasn't the first strange interaction I'd had recently. Not even close. For weeks, people had been acting differently around me. Friends checking in for no reason. Coworkers asking if I was okay. Neighbors smiling at me with uncomfortable sympathy. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I thought maybe I looked tired. But standing in my sister's kitchen, watching her choose her words like she was talking to someone fragile, I realized there was something bigger happening. Something I wasn't being told. I set down my coffee mug and looked directly at her. "Why are you asking me that?" The color drained from her face. And right then, I knew. She knew something, or thought she did. Something about me. Something I had never told her. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said the words that changed everything. "Your husband said you've been struggling." I remember staring at her, waiting for the rest, because surely she meant stress, work problems, maybe anxiety, something normal. Instead, she lowered her voice. "He said you're having episodes." Episodes. That word. Even now, it makes my skin crawl. I felt like the floor vanished beneath me. What episodes? My sister immediately looked uncomfortable, like she'd already said too much. But it was too late. The damage was done. "He told us you've been forgetting things." I blinked. "What?" "He said you've become paranoid." Another blink. "He said you sometimes imagine conversations that never happened." I couldn't breathe. I honestly couldn't breathe, because every single word coming out of her mouth was a lie. Not exaggerated, not misunderstood. A lie. A complete fabrication. And the worst part? The way she said it. The way she genuinely believed she was helping me. Helping me. I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat there frozen while she continued. Apparently, my husband had been worried for months. Apparently, he was trying to protect me. Apparently, he was exhausted from caring for me. Apparently, everyone was concerned. Everyone except me, because I was the only person who hadn't heard any of this. And as she kept talking, a horrifying realization began forming in my mind. This wasn't a rumor. Rumors spread randomly. This was organized, careful, deliberate. The same story had been told to multiple people, the same details, the same concern, the same warnings. Someone had been building a version of me, and that someone was my husband. The man I'd been married to for 11 years. The man who kissed me goodbye every morning. The man who slept beside me every night. The man who looked me in the eye and told me he loved me. I somehow finished the conversation without breaking down. I don't even remember driving home. But I remember walking into my house. I remember hearing his voice from the living room. I remember him smiling when he saw me. And I remember the exact moment I understood something that would guide every decision I made afterward. I couldn't confront him. Not yet. The first thing I did was stop asking questions. That sounds strange, but hear me out. The moment I learned my husband had been telling people I was mentally unstable, I understood one thing. If I confronted him too early, he'd just change tactics. He'd get more careful, more secretive, and I'd never learn what was really going on. So instead, I became the version of me he expected: quiet, trusting, unaware. Every morning, I'd smile when he left for work. Every night, I'd listen to him tell me about his day. And all the while, I was paying attention, really paying attention. For the first few days, I didn't find much. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that explained why he was destroying my reputation behind my back. But I started noticing little things, tiny cracks, the kind most people ignore, like how he'd suddenly stop talking when I entered a room, or how he'd angle his phone away from me, or how quickly he changed subjects whenever conversations involved mutual friends. At first, I thought maybe I was becoming paranoid, which, honestly, terrified me, because that's exactly what he'd been telling everyone. Then something happened that changed everything. I met one of our friends for lunch, a woman I'd known for nearly a decade. Halfway through the meal, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand, the same way my sister had. That same pity, that same caution. My heart sank. I decided to test something. I lowered my voice and said, "Can I ask you a weird question?" She nodded. "Has my husband been talking about me?" The expression on her face told me everything before she even spoke. She looked trapped, like she'd accidentally walked into a minefield. And that's when I knew this wasn't isolated. This was widespread. She hesitated, then finally said, "He was worried about you." The exact same wording. Worried. Always always concerned, always the loving husband carrying some terrible burden. I almost laughed. The consistency was unbelievable. Like he'd rehearsed it. Maybe he had. I kept my face neutral. What exactly did he say? She shifted uncomfortably. Then the truth started pouring out. Apparently, I'd become forgetful. Apparently, I accused people of things that never happened. Apparently, I had emotional outbursts. Apparently, I struggled to distinguish reality from imagination. Every sentence felt like a punch to the chest, because none of it was true. None. But here's the part that really bothered me. The details were evolving. The story was getting bigger. Each person had heard slightly different versions, different examples, different incidents, different warnings. That meant he'd been doing this for a long time, building evidence, creating a narrative, piece by piece, person by person. And suddenly, a terrifying question entered my mind. What was he telling people about me right now, at that exact moment? What stories existed that I hadn't even heard yet? I left lunch feeling sick. Not angry, not yet. Sick. Because I realized I wasn't dealing with gossip. I was dealing with a campaign. A carefully managed campaign against my own credibility. And if enough people believed it, then eventually nothing I said would matter. That night, I watched my husband from across the dinner table. He was laughing, telling a story, acting completely normal. I remember thinking how convincing he was, how easy it would be to trust him if I didn't know what he was doing. Then something strange happened. His phone lit up. Just for a second. A message preview appeared. He grabbed the phone so fast it was almost instinctive, but not fast enough. I only saw a few words, not the full message, just enough. "Miss you already." My blood ran cold, because the message wasn't from me, and the contact name definitely wasn't anyone I recognized. He looked up, caught me glancing at the phone. For a split second, panic flashed across his face. Then it vanished, replaced by a smile. "Everything okay?" he asked. I smiled back. "Of course." And that's when I knew. The rumors weren't the real secret. They were covering for something much bigger. I just didn't know what it was yet. But 3 nights later, I would accidentally see something on his laptop that answered that question, and I almost wished I hadn't. 3 nights later, my husband fell asleep on the couch. That almost never happened. He'd been working on something on his laptop, watching television, and somewhere around midnight, he drifted off. The laptop was still open, still glowing, still unlocked. And before anyone says it, I know I shouldn't have looked. But at that point, I already knew he was lying about me. I already knew he was spreading stories behind my back. Trust had left the building. So I walked over and I looked. What I found wasn't a secret email account. It wasn't dating apps. It wasn't even messages, at least not at first. It was a document with my name in the title, my full name. I remember my pulse instantly speeding up. The file was several pages long. I clicked it. And for a second, I genuinely thought I was misunderstanding what I was seeing, because it looked like a journal. Except I hadn't written it. He had. Page after page. Dates, observations, incidents, notes, all about me. Or, more accurately, a fictional version of me. According to his document, I had mood swings, memory problems, paranoia, emotional instability. There were dozens of entries, each one describing situations that either never happened or had been completely twisted. One entry claimed I'd forgotten an important family event. The truth? I had missed it because I was in the emergency room with food poisoning. Another claimed I'd become irrationally suspicious over missing money. The truth? Money had actually disappeared from our joint account. I remembered that argument perfectly. The more I read, the more horrified I became. Because he wasn't just lying. He was creating records, documentation, a paper trail, something that looked official, something that looked credible. And then I saw a sentence that made my hands start shaking. In case her condition continues to worsen, this record may be helpful later. Helpful later. Later for what? I stared at those words for what felt like forever, trying to understand what game he was playing, trying to understand why any husband would need years of manufactured evidence against his wife. Then I heard movement behind me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My husband shifted on the couch, still asleep. I quickly closed the file, my heart pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. That night, I barely slept, because now I knew 2 things. First, he wasn't improvising. This wasn't some random lie. It was planned, documented, maintained. And second, there was a future goal, a reason he was collecting all this, a reason he kept using the phrase condition, a reason he needed other people to believe I was unstable. The next morning, I decided to test the scope of the damage. And honestly, I wasn't prepared for what I learned. Over the following week, I started paying attention to people around me, really paying attention. Conversations suddenly made sense. The weird looks, the awkward pauses, the hesitation whenever I disagreed with someone. One moment stands out more than any other. I was having coffee with 2 friends. The discussion turned to vacation plans. Simple conversation, nothing serious. One of them remembered an event differently than I did. Normally, we'd laugh and move on. But this time, something happened. The other friend looked at me and said, "Maybe you're remembering it wrong." Not unusual on its own, except for the tone, the certainty, the immediate assumption that I was mistaken. Then she caught herself, and I saw it, that flash of embarrassment, because she knew exactly where that assumption came from. My husband. Suddenly, I noticed it everywhere. People second-guessing me, correcting me, questioning my recollection of things. Tiny moments, small moments, but all pointing in the same direction. He'd poisoned the well, slowly, carefully, over years. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The scariest part wasn't that people believed him. The scariest part was that they believed him because he seemed trustworthy, loving, patient, concerned. He never attacked me directly. That would have raised alarms. Instead, he presented himself as a worried husband trying to help, which made his lies infinitely more effective. And that's when a disturbing possibility entered my mind. What if this wasn't only about reputation? What if he was preparing people to reject anything I might say in the future? Any accusation, any warning, any truth? The idea terrified me, because if that was true, then there had to be something he desperately didn't want me exposing, something worth years of manipulation, something worth turning me into the unreliable one. I didn't know what it was yet, but 2 days later, while searching through old financial records, I found the first real clue, and it led directly to a woman I'd never heard of before.